And hello. I've had to do a last minute restart of the system. Everything went wrong on me. So I'm hoping that you can hear me now. There was definitely no sound at the start. I'm pretty certain of that. But you should have sound now. So hopefully that's okay. Hi, and welcome to Monday Musing. And today's subject is all about designing scenery and terrain. So I've basically just been working on a few bits and bobs as I'm building up towards moving back towards the Gene Stealer Cult Army. I'm still working on my wonderful Magma Drophy conversions and things like that, but I'm hoping to get those done within the next 4 weeks. I think I'm aiming for, if I can get the Fire Slayers done in the next 4 weeks, and I'll be turning my attention to a lot of 40k. So part of that prompted me to get some of those terrain projects off the shelf and have a quick look at them and see how they're doing. Oh, there's a few people saying you can't hear me, but I think that's the 20-second delay, so hopefully you can hear me by now. Please tell me that's the case. Anyway, I'm going to keep talking because according to my system there's sound, so I'm only pretty certain that we will have sound in a bit. Right, okay then. Yes, I've been pulling off the shelf some of the terrain projects I was working on, and I was thinking, have I got everything I need for the pending sort of 40k campaigns and stuff like that. And I did kind of think, I've never really done a show that's just dedicated to sort of terrain and scenery. I've talked about what makes good terrain in terms of the mechanic of the game, but I've never really talked about the kind of build your own terrain and scenery. I've done a few reviews of some scenery recently, and it's great stuff, without a doubt. The off-the-shelf, ready painted or printed on, the XLC stuff, it's all amazing stuff. But I do think, there's also room for the hobbyist, if you like, to kind of create your own scenery. And to be honest, it's most of the stuff we do is miniature, and it's really nice to do a big project every now and then. So I thought I'd have a chat through that. I've not had anybody yet confirm that there is sound. So can somebody say yes, there definitely is sound? Because the last comment I had was what? Why is there no sound from Reaper 28? So maybe there's just a hang up in the system. As I said, I've had some technical issues tonight and had to do a last minute restart of everything, which seems to have triggered off things like the microphones not being picked up and stuff like that. So I'm hoping there is. Coleman says yes, there is sound. So there you go. Right. Maybe we should make a start. But before we do, let's maybe have a quick chat through who's in the chat actually tonight. Who have we got out there? I think we've got about 26 people out there? 28 people out there? Hello, welcome. If you haven't commented before, drop me a comment in the chat and we'll say hi and hello. If you've got any questions or any advice for making terrain as well, stick that in there. Put at Wargamer Online at the beginning. At Wargamer Online at the beginning. and it pops up for me in a nice big red highlight so I can spot when people are asking me stuff. So Jim Wilson, Marty Milligan are in the chat. Joe Scoville as well, Medic 66666. Hey Medic, how you doing, man? Just opened the Dark Imperium box and closed it again. Couldn't decide where to start. Maybe tomorrow. Oh, come on. Start at the beginning. That's what you always need to do. Funbug number 1 is in there as well. After building or painting a hero first, I usually want to build or paint his friends next time. Okay. It makes sense, actually. It makes sense. There was a little issue. I've had all sorts of technical problems tonight as well. There was an issue where there was 2 shows for some inexplicable reason. I don't know why. Derpimus Maximus is in there. Reaper 28, the good old favourite, is in there. Who else have we got? Coleman joining us. Martin Dix is in there, but actually, unfortunately, Martin Dix, I'm pretty certain, has had to leave, if I remember rightly. He's got to go into work. He's on shift work. So you will be missed, Martin. You will be missed. But I know you're going to catch the show on catch-up. Right, okay. There was a little bit of a chat around the army builder, the combat roster that's just been released. I posted that up on the Facebook group as well, and give a quick mention to that. And I think the general gist of it all is it's a fairly basic tool. It feels a bit beta-ish. I mean, I can't get the search to work, for instance, so it doesn't feel like it's been heavily tested. But you know, if you go onto the search and type Wraith Lord, you definitely don't get any results. I've even done the whole navigate to a Wraith Lord, unit, copy paste the title just in case I was spelling it wrong or missing something out or something, but no. So it's a strange thing. It feels like it wasn't quite ready. And also, I'm slightly confused of who it would appeal to really in the 40k world. There's not many people just working on PowerPoints. I'm pretty certain everybody I know at least does points. I know there are players out there that do power, but also power isn't particularly difficult mechanism to work with. So I'm not sure you actually need a combat roster for it, but it's a kind of nice little tool, isn't it? And that's the thing. They do in the article on the community page say they're going to produce an app which will be based for points. Not surprised, there's a lot more going off for the point side of things, so we'll keep an eye out for that basically. So yeah, bit of a strange one. Fun to play with still, even so. What else we got? Thordalim saying good evening. Daryl Hewitt is in there as well. Coleman, I think I've mentioned. Reaper, Alt Boys is in there. Hey, Rower is in there as well. Jim Wilson saying hello to each other. Retep 10001, hi there. Hi Retep, how you doing, man? Crikey, yeah, there's a few in there. Red Cuffs is in there tonight as well. Marcus Hackmeister, awesome. Anyone into bolt action? Sam and Mikey, your bolt action fans. There's definitely bolt action fans in the usually in the chat as well. So somebody's probably answered that. But yes, there's also in our local gaming club, there's a bunch of bolt action players as well. So I am thinking of trying to film at least 1 or 2 games that they play. They'll not be like the full-on polished battle reports, but you know, if I'm down the studio and a couple of guys are getting a bolt action game, we might get them to come onto the table and just film it. We'll see. Right, okay then. Derpimus Maximus officially said it would be released in April. I think that's about games and stuff like that. People saying they can't hear me. Oh dear me. Yes, there is sound. I hear sound. Fellhate hears sound as well. Pizzario says we can hear you. So does Dr. Rotopus saying hello. Rotopus, awesome name. C. Mawson. Yes, there's sound. Right, okay. Are we? Oh, crikey. I thought we were almost at the bottom there, and then I've just seen a whole bunch more chat. Daryl says, I'm more interested in how you build your hobby room. I'm sure we chatted about it a few months ago. Would rather not spend $2,000 on a summer house. Okay, yeah, we could do one about that. I've built a few buildings in my time. The first major one I built, I did build a couple of custom sheds and like a lean-to extension against an house I lived in years ago. But when we moved here, I built a workshop, and that workshop's about 12 foot wide and about 24 foot long, something like that. Maybe not that long, maybe about 20 foot long. That was my biggest build by far, and that's like huge wooden building. It's got all my tools in there and stuff like that, and I absolutely love that. I also built a summer house as well, but at the moment this is in a double garage, a sort of hacked around semi-converted double garage. It's not even fully converted. We do intend to turn this room into a proper room at some point. Right, okay then, so maybe that's one for the show. You never know. Never start at the beginning, always skip to the end and find out who done it. That's from Derpimus Maximus. And indeed, Zebra. Red Cuffs, Drain, I use books, cans, house bricks, bits of wood. Awesome. Well, there you go. That's great stuff if you're kicking off from the start. And to be honest, you know, like cans, there's nothing wrong with cans. You paint them up, and you know, tin cans and stuff like that can be used as bunkers and those kind of things. Just slap some emulsion paint on there and a bit of a wash, and off you go. We'll talk about that as well. Right, Thordalim is in there. Space Wolves don't seem to have Primaris in their list. There's a lot of people talking about that. It seems to be that they've just put the units, you know, most of the stuff has just gone in Space Marines, and then any unique units are listed under the name. So you basically build your core Space Marine unit choices, and then you go across the Space Wolves to find out the little Wolfie McWolf flyer and stuff like that. That's how it seems to be, but it seems, like I say, it feels very beta-ish. Right, Alt Boys, Necromunda Terrain, throw your money at Sector Mechanicus kits. That's one option. Look behind me. I certainly did throw some money at that. They are beautiful kits, don't get me wrong. But what I'm doing is I'm creating sort of some combi terrain bits, which uses Sector Mechanicus and some of the desert terrain that I built a while ago. Who else we got? Kablams, Alt Boys, Dunny Woods. I think I've said all of that. C. Mawson, Misty asks, so can't tag the relevant person, but I'm doing Bolt Action Brits as part of my WGOC efforts. So the Wargamer Online, why have I forgotten the name of it? Help me out here. Oh, you know what? It's going to be one of those nights. I have had an incredibly long day. Chronicles. So Wargamer Online runs a Chronicles once a year where you get to build an army and sort of post it all up on the forum. And as C. Mawson's just said, he's posting up Bolt Action Brits on there. So there's plenty of stuff going on there. And I know that Sam has done a bunch of reviews and stuff like that. And I think there's even some book reviews coming up fairly shortly on Bolt Action as well. So check that out. Daryl says, maybe something for the forum, a post about hobby rooms in general. Yes, I've long since promised how to build my super fold away table as well. Which Mike came round the other night to do that speak out video. He wasn't actually on the video, but he was helping out in the background. And he was surprised because he'd seen it with the table out, and then he walked back into the room and he was like, oh, where's the table gone? I'm pretty pleased with that. That kind of concertina folded table. You know, it sits against the wall. It's less than 6 inches wide. I really like that. I think that's something that I should do an article on the forum on how to do that. Scott says, hello, Phil. Won't be using the roster, but GW is trying at least. Yes, exactly. At least they're trying. And, of course, in the article it says they've got a full app on the way, so expect more from them. Simon, just have to say this out loud. I'm seriously looking forward to Death Watch Codex. I might go mad waiting. I'm pretty excited to see what they do with Harlequins, actually. I'm kind of hoping we see, you know, some Eldar factions that can stand on their own without the injection of Inari, basically. Yeah, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, don't start with the Eldar hate, because I know that they're still a fairly strong army, if you like. But I do feel like the Inari is like the, you know, that's the choice that you have to do if you want to be competitive with Eldar. You know, and you want to play a fun list. You don't just want to spam Dart Reapers and all the rest. So yeah, it will be nice to see what they do with Harlequins as well. And it's nice that those two are coming out together, because there's plenty of those Death Watch boxes out there. Death Watch? Death Mask? Death Mask. Death Mask in the past, wasn't it? Scott says, looking forward to terrain for Kill Team. Oh man, that is amazing terrain. I'm with you there. I'm sure everybody here knows well enough, but since Chronicles have been mentioned for reply watchers, you can find it here. Well, there you go. There you go. Loads of, awesome. Thank you very much, Coleman. Linking through to the Wargamer Online forum, which I think I can show. There it is, look. So if you scroll down on the forum, if you're coming into the forum, go along to Chronicles, and you can see all the super cool stuff that's going off at the Chronicles at the moment, particularly if your page eventually refreshes, which mine has, just about. So there's a bunch of new posts in there. Joe's put Blades of Clawn, Tom Wilson, Iron Jaws, 1,000 points, Grendel's, Necrons, Darren, Baz, yeah, it's all in there. So go check that stuff out. Right, okay. Let's start with talking about terrain a bit, and kind of the process I go through, really. I've not prepared much for this. I've got some photos, quite a lot of photos actually, so this might be a bit more of a Uncle Phil's slideshow than a full-on show, but we'll see. Planning is definitely the first place to start. Before I start picking up any terrain, before I start picking up any foam or foam core card or anything else like that, and bits of wood and all the rest, I have to say I spend a great deal of time at the paper and pen stage. And I talked in the past about how to, if you like, go around designing terrain in the past. There's a Monday Musing in the past which talks about taking consideration, if you like, into, you know, how does line of sight work? How big are my model bases? All of those things you kind of need to bear in mind. Is this terrain that just is a line of sight blocker, or is this terrain that takes an active part in the game? And if it's by an active part in the game, can models move across it? Can they hide within it? Can units move across it? Can larger base units move across it? Those kind of things. If they're going to walk up and down it, because that's how distances are measured nowadays. You know, if it's 7 inches tall, then most things aren't really going to be able to get to the top in one move, and therefore, you know, they're never going to be able to scale it, and those kind of things. So you think about the game mechanic as much as anything. But I really think, for me, the planning stage also incorporates not only the basic idea, what am I trying to build and what is it going to look like. I think you then have to get into kind of a research phase as well. So I'll give some examples of this. If I was to take, and I'm going to have to jump around. Classically, I've started at a slightly different place. So give me a second while I just track down the right imagery. Here we go. This image here. Let's see if we can get this up. There you go. This image here, which I found on Google. It's not my copyright or anything like that, so I've left the stamp up there so people can see the original reference. This was my starting point for my Zone Mortalis. I just love this image. I love the colours, I love the lighting, I love the equipment. I did a bit more digging around, and the kind of thing you see there is, I love this sort of yellow mining equipment and those kind of things. The yellow and black, the really, look at that chalky sort of slushy base and those kind of things. And again, you know, just having a quick look at that. Just, you know, I was looking for inspiration of how the lighting would work, what colour of the rock would be, you know, and I think that's important, to spend a decent amount of time thinking about, you know, what's the aesthetic of this going to be? How's it going to look? So once you've got past that mechanic stage of, you know, what size is it going to be and those kind of things, that's okay, get that down on paper. You know, think about it in the context of the gameplay. As soon as you've done that, start thinking about how it's going to look and feel, and try and stamp that vision in your mind. And I'll come back to why that's important, because you know, the distance between what you want to achieve and sketching it out on a piece of paper in any terrain project is a relatively long piece of time. It doesn't have to be you know, a long piece of time in terms of calendar, but it's an investment of time. My Zone Mortalis board, I think I worked on it for pretty much 4 weeks solid. You know, so from conception, sketching it up on paper, you know, to you know, having it ready to actually play a game on. Let's catch on a couple of questions before we move on. I want to have a look at that project actually. So let's have a look at the Zone Mortalis project, and I'll talk through some of the things that went through my head and the design decisions I made along the way. Kabalam says, was considering to make a posh fold-away table, but then I remembered how much crap I have stored under my table. Yeah, yeah, and you know what? I folded my table out and then stored crap under it, and had to have a real dedicated tidy up so I could fold the table back away again. Simon is looking forward to stratagems. Oh, yeah, it's all going to be good, I have to say. I'm pretty excited. It will be nice to see those two factions on the table again, so I'm really hoping they do some justice with the codex. Simon Key says, evening all. Good evening, Simon. Good. Thanks for joining us, mate. DJ, the lucky one is in there. Red Cuff, terrains need to be flat packed for storage. Yeah, well, we'll come to that. That's definitely one of the considerations, isn't it? You know, that whole... We'll talk about some of the hybrid tables I've done where I've used you know, the neoprene mats as the base of the table, but then I've made terrain to go on it, and I think that's effective. And the mats go away and the terrain fits in one of those little IKEA storage cubes. You know, and that's the thing. This is going to sound strange now, but thinking about the storage is an important part of it. So when I designed the terrain for the lava, I intentionally designed it so they would fit around each other. That was one of the considerations. And in a sort of 1.5 foot cube, I can fit all of the terrain for a 4x4 table into one little cube that packs away into the unit. But do give storage some consideration right at the start, definitely. Good call. Okay, Big Mac. I think modularity can play a key role in making terrain. It enables you to set up the board in multiple ways, providing different challenges depending on the setup. Sure thing, and modularity comes about in 2 or 3 different ways. First and foremost, as I said, the neoprene mat, and then just terrain pieces that you place down. Awesome, that's great. The alternative is the board option. If we take Zone Mortalis, it's essentially 1 foot square. You take the standard Citadel battle boards, they're 2 foot square, and I have to say that's my favour because the less joins on the table I think are better. I try to disguise the joins as much as possible, but that's what I've done. And most of the stuff I have built, I've made it, strangely enough, even tables that didn't need to be, I've made them compatible with the Citadel gaming tables because I just had a couple of those at the very start. Kablams, like your new stuff, Big Mac Dan Skull. We'll have to check that out. I've not checked that out. We will check it out. Red Cuffs, modular, flat packable. Matthew Edgeworth, Big Mac, couldn't agree more. There you go. Simony, any tips for Martian terrain? Well, yes, definitely. We'll talk about that. I'll be showing a desert board at some point, Sean, so have a look at that because I show like a cracked turf texture and those kind of things. So there's definitely room for that. I mean, admittedly I painted it a kind of sandy brown, but you could just paint it a red. There's lots you can do with that, so we'll come back to that. Right, okay, let's talk about some of the design processes I went on. John Jay's just joined us. Hey, don't worry about being late, that's okay, that's cool. I'm just going to have a look at the first reference project, if you like, we went through. So this was the very start of not the very start, but this was the start of the mine for the Zone Mortalis, and I called it the Mine Mortalis. Always give your projects a nickname. It really helps if they've got a project name, keeps you motivated. So this was a test piece, and it looks like if you look, even on this test piece, I've invested quite a bit of time. First and foremost, obviously, I've made sure I've cut the foam to the right size. I'm putting a model next to it just to see what it's like. Check out my little Dark Angels there. That's an incomplete army. Maybe one day. I painted them the wrong colour, I know. So checking it out. In that, I've already spent the time to create the door sliders. So I talked about the sketching and those kind of things, and in my notepad I've got all the sketching about how the doors are going to work, and I've got some idea. That was using 2 of the Citadel plastic strips from the city terrain. Cities of Death terrain, and stuck on a bit of plastic card, and then I knew I'd done some basic calculations. I was going to need about 170 of those, so there's no way I could get that all out in plastic. So I cast those door sliders for my own use and set about doing that. I mean, admittedly, I could have made them myself because it was just 2 strips of plastic and stuck on a bit of plastic card, and then you can add the rivets, can't you? But in this instance, for expediency, I did that. And I made a mould that I think could cast about 12 at a time as well. So I knew I was in for a few nights. I put those on the side and got working on that. But needless to say, this was my first point. And of course I wanted to know, are the doors going to work? And what's great about that piece was, actually that's just one piece. My test piece, I could split it apart and I could try the door in the joins, and I could try it together as a wall section. So again, I was already thinking kind of economically, how can I get a test piece? How can I make sure this is going to work? What's a 100mm wide corridor going to look like? What are models going to look like when they're in there? Crikey. And I did spend a bit of time on this, as you will see. Once I was pretty happy with this one piece though, I then set about making many of these. I was fairly fortunate. I used, I think with this I had a large crafting knife that was doing most of the slices with. But believe it or not, I was actually using a routing table to make those slots. And I did mention at the time, I think I did a couple of little videos on this, and I was saying the slots are an extravagance. If you didn't have a router, you could just stick those door frames on the wall and make the doors slightly narrower. So that would be the way to go. What's interesting is you can see already the level of planning that's gone into this. So over here, look, I've actually spent a deal of time planning how many sections I need. So I want, these boards here, in which case I need 16 of those door jambs. And on that table there, I need 14 of the door jambs. And this needs 8 of the door jambs. So I was already doing the math. And over on this little bit here, that's the length of the walls. I need 4 of those, and 4 of those, and 12 of those, and 12 of those. So I'd spent the time. And I think this is really important. It makes you very productive. If you can do all the thinking up the front, all you've got to do once you get started is the doing. And if you're doing the doing and not the thinking, the doing, the thinking, the doing, the thinking, the doing, you get stuff done a lot faster. So right now I could switch the brain off and just become a terrain making machine, basically. So once, of course, as soon as you start pushing through all this, test and test and test again. So I'm cutting all of these pieces. I'm laying them down onto my plywood sections. The plywood sections here we cut at are in the UK. We have this DIY chain store called B&Q. They have cutting tables, so you go along and you buy a sheet of 8x4, and you just say to the guy with a big giant machine, "Can you cut that down to 35mm squares for me, please?" And by doing that, I knew it would two of those together would fit lovely alongside the standard 610mm, essentially the 2-foot squares. Okay. Now, once I'm onto there, I mean, in this one, I needed everything I'm considering is what I'm about to commit to efficient in terms of time and effort. So I wanted a rocky texture. I knew that was going to have to be the way. There's 2 ways I could do it. I could hack at it with a knife and or smash it with a hammer, but what tends to happen is that just compresses the foam and it tends to swell back out again. Or I could use heat, and I knew I got a little blowtorch somewhere, a little cooking blowtorch, and thought I would give that a go. So again, on a test piece, before I got too excited, I just took it outside in the nice fresh air and swiped a blowtorch across it and went, you know what, that works. What didn't work was the corners. You can kind of see here on these corners. They went horrible when they were heated. They ended up with this hard ridge. So actually what I had to do was to just round each one of the corners slightly with a blade. I cut the corner off. So again, I'm just thinking all the time, is this going to be quick? How long did that take me to do, knowing I've got all of those other pieces to do? So, just consider the time you've got available and be realistic about what you can invest into the terrain piece, because there's nothing worse than an incomplete terrain project. There's that thing, that beautiful idea that never got realization. And I think it's much more, it's better to be driven towards the end goal of completed terrain that you can actually put down and play a game on. That's what you're aiming for. That's what this is all about. So focus on techniques and methods that will get it done quickly. Crikey, I'm going to jump through all of this because, as you can see, I'm constantly testing. I'm constantly saying, does this work? Does it look better than just the straight walls? Which I think it did. We'll come back to that shortly. Let's catch up in the chat. Okay. Oh, there you go. Big Mac Danskill says, hi, exactly my new stuff. Simon, he says, also, what is your opinion on 8th edition rules for terrain, influence basis for terrain? Yeah, I mean, what has 8th edition done to it? It's been pretty harsh on terrain, I have to say. It's made everybody think about line of sight. That's why you see the XLC Desolation City. Awesome piece of terrain, particularly for 8th edition, because it's really high line of sight blockers. So it's proper city fighting. There's hardly any windows. I've got some of the old city terrain, and I think the best way to do it is just house rule that you can't fire through the windows. Just because it's open on the model and you can see through the windows. No, there's detritus hanging across it. There's still some glass in place. It's filthy. You can't see. I think it's one of the best ways of just doing it. So you can just adapt a house rule to your terrain as well, but just be clear with the players right from the start whether something's area terrain or not, whether the base around terrain constitutes as part of its area terrain. So, can you stand in front of a wall, but on its base, does that constitute as having cover? And in my mind, anything with a wall, I generally don't count the base. It's more to do with kind of, forests and broken smoke piles and those kind of things that you're kind of doing that have that area terrain rule. So big impact on the game. And I think 8th edition, in many respects, is a sad time for terrain. But saying that, GW are releasing dozens of games, Necromunda amongst others, where terrain plays a huge part of the game. And I think maybe that's what we're seeing. Those more complex terrain rules that a gamer like myself loves, we're seeing those in the smaller skirmish games. And then in the big battle games, they're going, let's just simplify this so you can get on with the game. You're not calculating, well, those 3 guys have got a 2 up and those have got a 1 up. And they've got rid of all of that, haven't they? So I get it. I get it. There are city rules, and in Age of Sigmar, for instance, there's forge. Why am I saying forge? Siege rules and those kind of things. So there is rules available, but yeah, make your own. Reaper says, what is the best, cheapest way to create bunkers, buildings and ruins? Homemade, probably. Well, we'll talk about that. I mean, think about basic, easily accessible materials. You want bunkers? Then, yeah, there's nothing wrong with a tin can. Wonderfully accessible. Not the easiest of things to cut in half, but if you want to do that sort of half bunker thing, it can be done. I recommend investing in a few tools, certainly if you're going to get into building your own terrain, but you don't have to. But things like a Dremel with a little steel cutter, as well as grinding tools and stuff, are really, really useful. But anyway, so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Okay, what was this page in for? The reason this image is in there, if I remember rightly, the reason this image is in there is to just say, push on, because at this stage I thought this was dreadful. And I think that's the thing, is you do have to keep that end vision in mind as well. Keep opening those photos up and saying, am I going in the right direction? Go back to your original source material, because right now I wasn't very happy with how this terrain was turning out at all. This is it in its cleanest form. And I suppose now this is the point to make. The next part, I think the strongest part of successful terrain work, is layers and layers of detail. Now, I'll come back to my original point. I mean, in theory, it's playable at this stage. You could hold a game on that. You could slide some bits of cardboard down in the door and have a bit of fun and those kind of things. But I keep opening those photos up and say, well, those photos, they had a lot of dirt and variation of tone and those wonderful lights and bits of wires and those kind of things. And as you can see, I've already invested a bunch of time. I've stuck lights on the walls. Let me see if I can get closer to that. There's little lights on the walls. All the door jambs are in. The lift shafts are in and those kind of things. But I knew that it would benefit greatly if I took it a step further. So I start scouting around the old bits box and firing control panels and little bits of pipe and grill, and I think I went out and bought a couple of packs of the pipe works and those kind of things. But I definitely had loads of this stuff left over, because you just got tons of this. I can't even remember what that comes in. That comes in one of the Mechanicum sets, and I was lucky enough to be given a load of the Mechanicum sets. So really started to just hack away in the spares box. Never throw any sprue away. You could see also in there as well a ladder, and I had dozens of those ladders as well. And it's the kind of terrain that none of your mates use. They just don't bother with the ladders. So you can ask around, has anybody got any of these ladders? Go on the forums, hit people up for spare parts, because stuff like that most people aren't bothered with. They'll build the city ruin. They don't bother putting the ladders in. It's just an unnecessary detail for the game. We are... So yeah, pushing on for the detail. There's me considering storage. Is this thing going to store away okay? I mean, I hate to say it, but that's literally what I was working out there, is how much room is this thing going to take up when it's done. Push on with detail. So I'm now into the box and I'm finding bits of pipes and anything, and grills and fans. I think those fans are actually off... those little fan sections there are off a converted Valkyrie, the flyer. So yeah, as you can see, I'm really hitting it with everything now. Little bits of spare drills, anything. I'm into all of my spare bots. Anything I've used on the conversion, I'm using this to create detritus, basically, just scattered around the place. And as you can see, what I'm trying to do is build the detail up. I quite like this as well. I'd actually just gone a bit too crazy with the there with the heat gun, and melted too much of the wall away. And of course, treat that as fortune. So I just, right, okay, well, I'll have to shore that up with some extra ironwork. We're pushing on a little bit here now, but as you can see, what I'm doing now is little bits of copper wire. They weren't copper wire, actually. This was USB cables that were no longer working. So I was cutting the outer plastic off of the USB cable, pulling out all the wires, twisting them together, and I was wiring up my light bulbs. Yes, this was insane. Back to that whole thing. Go as far as you want to go with the detail, but don't feel you have to go to the nth degree. I do feel though that I have to kind of segment those details, like, you know, stage 1, get the thing built, stage 2, get it painted, stage 3, drop an acceptable level of detail in, and then I'll make a choice about stage 4, 5 and 6, whatever the final stage is, like that final painting stage. But in between that final painting stage and where I'm at right now, I'm thinking, where am I on the calendar? When do I want to get this project done by? I definitely want it finished. So if I do another layer of detail, is that going to stop me actually getting this thing finished? In which case, I will just move on. But if not, you know, I'll get on with it. And in this case, I did. I think I added quite a bit more detail. I mean, ignore what's going off there with it. That was the old patriarch in his throne. I wanted to recreate the old patriarch throne with a spare patriarch model I had. So there you go. So I was just having some fun with that. We'll come back to this in a second. Right, what have we got going off in the chat? Simon Key, were you tempted to print up the wall sections? No. It would have taken too long, and it was so much easier in the blue foam. If I was doing, you know, a more mechanical based one, if I was going to really try and, you know, do the Zone Mortalis and stuff, you know, I've seen on Thingiverse, there's some great stuff for Zone Mortalis on Thingiverse. So yeah, I'd be tempted to print some of those things up because they look amazing. But in this instance, no, it was much easier to get the blue foam, and I was up and running really fast. What kind of paint do you use for terrain, says Reaper? Emulsion paint, standard house paint. In the UK, I have a brand called Dulux. I'm pretty certain they're pretty much worldwide anyway. You can have pot paint mixed to your liking, to your color scheme, basically. In fact, I've got an image where I did that. So what I was doing was painting, not in this instance, but in another project, I was painting Xandridos onto a big swatch and going down to the DIY shop and saying, you know, give me a 1 litre pot or a 2 litre pot of emulsion paint, colour match to this, and they can use a little scanner and they create you a 5.5 litre tub of Xandri dust. So yeah, emulsion paints. You can use, like, you know, really cheap craft paints and those kind of things, but the great thing about emulsion paint is, particularly in most instances, if I'm painting on top of foam and stuff, I will get some standard plaster, throw that in the emulsion paint, give the whole thing a stir, not the full can, mix it a bit by bit because it can set on you, throw some plaster in the emulsion, mix that around, and I've got this kind of sloppy, gloopy combination of plaster and emulsion paint, which just gives it that little bit of a surface. Elster Nation says, good evening Elster Nation. Alt Boys is in there. Not bad painting wolves and custodies at the moment. Whew. Coleman, polite notice. What's this? It's a long-held tradition to celebrate any royal wedding by subscribing to Premium. It is indeed. As we know, the Queen actually watches Wargamer Online as well, or at least so we've been told. Reaper is working. Alas, I wanted to start another Blood Ravens veteran, but alas. Oh, DJ the Lucky One, cardboard tubes are great terrain. Starting points, good point. Again, and also easier to cut than the metal tins. So, solid idea. Plastic cans, plastic pots. You know what? Half the time, I just look at anything that's heading towards the bin and just think, can that make a piece of terrain? But don't become a hoarder. You know, if you can't think about anything that it's worth, certainly don't collect it so it never goes away. But you'd be surprised how much is out there. You know what? Cheap toys as well. Cheap plastic toys in second-hand shops and stuff like that. You'd be surprised how much you can find that could make good terrain as well. Sad times, Reaper. Okay. Well, let's move on. Space Hulk. I've been playing on a Space Hulk map recently. That's a cool idea. I do like the idea that we've seen some of the terrain companies releasing upgrades, if you like, for Necromunda, for those little subterranean boards, which is essentially just Zone Mortalis table anyway. I really need to play a Necromunda game in this terrain. Let's get back to this nonsense anyway. So, do you remember me saying about having a vision about what it's going to be like finished? Halfway through this project, I was thinking, why am I building a mine again? And it was all about the Gene Stealer Cult, and my Gene Stealer Cult is a mining corporation. I wanted to play Zone Mortalis games, or at least, some games based around mines, not necessarily full-on Zone Mortalis games. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if they were digging the mine for a reason? And that led me to this idea that they were trying to uncover a giant Tyrannid Leviathan that had sometimes crash landed on the planet some years earlier, and there was all sorts of wonderful Gene Stealery treasures in there. So this was my. I wonder if almost at the end of the project, saying, I wonder if I could just make a few more sections of this table, um, to look like the insides of a Tyranid hive sheep. So I went out, bought 2 cans of expanding foam, and got some spare sections. I did have some spare sections of the blue foam stuff, so I knew it was possible. And you can see my marking out there as well. You can see where I've marked out on the board. And the reason I marked out on the board is I still wanted this crazy weird interior to be compatible with my previous board, so I wanted roughly to follow how it would look. And I went about squirting on a whole bunch of expanding insulation foam. What's happening there is I didn't wait long enough for each layer to dry, because the cans, I've always found if you don't finish the can off properly, it's pretty much unusable anyway. So I wanted to use a full can, so I kept piling it on top, and what was happening is they started to collapse. So as soon as the surface had got enough strength to hold itself, to not be punctured by the little cocktail sticks, the little sticks there, I was wedging levers in to hold the wall back. Oh, crikey. So as you can see, went on, did a whole bunch of stuff. Of course, it's a mess and it's absolutely crazy. But again, I've got this vision in my mind. I've got an idea of what I'm trying to achieve. And 9/10 of actually making terrain, I think, is just having confidence that you'll get there in the end. Keep pushing through with the project. Right, here you go. You can see me with some quick drying filler. What's going off here? A little test piece over here. So I'm trying things out all the way through it. Is this going to work? I wanted to make the surface a little bit tougher, so I was mixing the filler with a bit of water and painting it on. This was meant to be some weird acid pool. I got 1 spare board, and I'd been slicing off the I'm trying to move that around onto it. I've been slicing off the tops of this so it was level with the rest of the terrain. And here's the next sort of little piece of advice is, before we put it in the bin, I was thinking, you know what, I'd take those slice off sections and I can make a little weird acid pool. So not everything's planned out, not everything's on paper, some of it's inspiration as you go along. But bear in mind, every time I did one of these things, I added an extra few hours to the overall project. I was like, hey, I could make an acid pool. And you start messing around and you go, now I've got to paint an acid pool and wait for it to dry and all the rest. Okay, here's me testing it. And you can see, this is probably just a quick shot. You can see what that's looking like. Now I've layered up some of that detail, basically. So that's at the stage I was at before I then went on this mad rambling diversion. Okay, I'm going to push through some of this really quick, because as you can see, all I was doing was checking it was working. And then it's just a question of getting some primers on it and those kind of things. And the great thing about expanding foam, particularly if you check it's the right one, I think it's polyurethane ones. Don't quote me on that, but most of the expanding foams will take primer can. So I just hit those with a black primer, and then I hit those with a grey spray can, and started to lay some colours down with the airbrush basically, and try and match them in to the boards I'd already done. And as you can see, I'm going absolutely insane by now. This thing was getting everywhere, so the project had definitely gone a bit crazy. In fact, you know what? Look up there. I don't know if you can see that. There's my crazy Tyranids just waiting for a game look. I was actually painting those at the same time. That was what was on the hobby desk at that point. Blimey. Right, okay. Pushing on. Going into the spares box, pulling out every little bit of plastic and all the rest, and just sticking it in to make it happen. So, I think I don't really want to show any more of this, because I think you get the general gist of it. What I was trying to do was to make sure, again, just keep layering it up, make something fun, make something interesting for other players to play on, make it as disgusting as hell. And for those of you who are saying, how come Phil's not been doing any 3D printing? Because I saved the 3D printing for the doors. When I worked out I needed to do something like 40 odd doors, and the idea of cutting all of those out of plastic and all the rest, or making them out of whatever I was going to make them out, I designed I think 6 or 7 masters inside 3D software, and then just hit them on the printout. And I don't care that they're a bit grady. I did them on the coarse printout on purpose. So and the reason I did that is because I wanted this sort of coarse texture that meant to be made of some weird rough steel, or something that's made who knows what. So you get the idea there. You can see my little quarantine doors and those kind of things. You can see I've tidied up the tops of this now. So again, all of this is thinking how what finishes it off. And I think we're pretty much there as far as this project was concerned. I made some lift doors. How cool are they? Sorry, they're my favourite doors. And yeah, I think somewhere in here, just at the very end there, you've got some. That's as far. Whoa, that's as far as they got. Basically, that's as far as that project got in terms of complete. So I still do have the doors to paint, because classically what happened is I didn't get this done on time, and we moved on to a whole bunch of stuff. I know exactly what happened. We decided the channel was doing well enough to justify a studio, so I stopped work on all of this and started work on a studio, and that distracted me away from bits like that. Right, okay, what have we got here? Cardboard tubes are great for terrain. I think I've covered that one. Simon Key says Pringle tubes for the win. Oh, what a cool idea. Coleman, a heap of polystyrene pizza bases waiting to be turned into something. One day, maybe. Wargamer Online, what is that made of? Reaper, I'm assuming you're talking about the expanding foam bit, because that comment was a while ago. So that's expanding insulation foam. Big Mate Danskill, I fell into a trash hoarding trap in the past. Piles of plastic built up until I realised I wasn't doing anything with it. So came to my senses and had a clear out. That's the thing. You do have to be careful. I don't tend to hoard stuff for future use. I think that's the best thing to do. At that planning stage where you're scribbling bits down on paper, that's a good time to start looking around and seeing what you can salvage. But salvage it with a project that you're working on, and know that it's going to make it to the table. Reaper says, use emulsion paint on that too, says Colin. I'm not quite sure what that is. DJ the Lucky One, seen a video or webpage about using kids' sci-fi toys, water pistols, to make terrain. That is an awesome idea. You know, the big cans and stuff in the water pistols. Yeah, because they're pretty cool. Nice. Is that placed on MDF or corkboard? That's actually ply. The reason is, in the past I feared MDF warping, but saying that, I've long since learned to just coat both sides of it with a PVA mixture, and that stops the warping. So I think if I was going to do it now, I'd do MDF. Back then it was plywood. Excuse me. I could trust 8mm plywood not to warp. Particularly the waterproof stuff. Right, could you add drills for scenery and have rules, e.g. mine collapse and those kind of things? Well, that's definitely going to be part of that. The new termites come out, hasn't it? And all those drilling equipment that you can get. So definitely some custom rules and some custom fun will be in a need for that. Simon Key says, what printer are you using? I use an ANET A8 to create those doors and stuff. It's not the best printer in the world, but it's certainly one of the cheapest. I think I paid £108 for it. All of £108, which is less than probably, well, I don't know, less than a box set of something. And it was definitely worthwhile. It was worth it just for those doors, and anything else was an absolute bonus. Never mind about my little magnetized thimbles and all the rest that I've made. Woo, didn't really show that very well. I use my 3D printer all the time now, to be honest. A lot of the camera equipment for WGO is held on 3D printed sort of GoPro-esque mounts. So, if I want to do the cameras mounted in a certain way, just print out a bunch of new mounts and mount them up. Oof, right, okay. DJ the Lucky One says, looking sweet. Evening all, says Marlborough 69. Marlborough 69, how are you doing, sir? It's good to see you back on the chat. I'm sure you've probably been around anyway, but it's good to see you. Right, what else was I going to talk about? Well, like I say, I wanted to kind of show you from front to back a couple of projects. So what else have I got here? Let's go right back to the top, because I did jump down to that one. How are we doing for time? Wow, we've really zoomed on for time. So let's go on to this one and let's talk about this and see if it prompts any conversation in the chat as well. Let's have a look. Okay, so this was the only terrain table we had when we started Wargamer Online. So we had one snowboard, and you probably saw it on almost all of our first battle reports, and I bet you haven't seen it for ages now, because we all got so tired of playing on that board. It was the same table over and over again. But needless to say, it's worth mentioning, that's a good example. That's the Citadel Realm of Battle tables. Actually, I'm a big fan of those. I think they're great tables. I think they pack away into a relatively small face with 3D terrain. I don't think 3D terrain is a big part of 40k anymore, or Age of Sigmar. Hills don't do anything. They don't really make a difference. You do get line of sight. It's worth mentioning, but really, do you get that much from being on top of a hill? Certainly if you're on top of the hill, you're exposed as well. We do play rules like the little steps add an extra inch to the movement, so they can still make an impact on the game. But needless to say, like I say, I do think certainly for my home table, my favourite approach at the moment is the neoprene mats, the gaming mats, and then homemade terrain, and a mixture of homemade terrain and bought terrain mixed together. So first thing I was doing there was I was extending that. I wanted some cracked river section that was dangerous terrain and difficult to cross and those kind of things, and that led us to being able to do an 8x4 board. But moving on, this was the next big project. Definitely want to do a large 40k city terrain piece, and maybe this was another one of those pieces of advice is no fear. It took quite a lot of courage to build up to take a saw to my my city terrain board, I have to say. But I had a vision. I'd done a bunch of sketching and I knew it could make it work, and I knew that, for instance, if I took that section out and that section out and then added these bits back in, what I could start to build is a canal. You see, so I was going somewhere with it. Not only was I thought this canal's looking great, but what it really needs, this canal that will run through the entire table, is going to be really cool, because it's going to be all gloopy and weird pipes and stuff like that. But I didn't like the fact that the bridge didn't raise up. So guess what? I took another jigsaw, drilled a couple of holes in the corner and took a jigsaw to the table. This is probably the worst plastic to cut ever, by the way. So if you fancy doing this, good luck to you. It melts at an incredibly low temperature, and that's what I mean by that. So the jigsaw was clogging up and all sorts. I had a lot of fun with this. But yeah, start building it up. Is this going to work? Yep, it's going to work. Start adding bits on, start sticking bits of detail on, grabbing the old bits box, pulling everything together as much as I can. Tops of ladders, little bits of nastiness going off in there in the river, and bits of rubbish floating around. Little pipes, and again just thinking, well, this pipe can spill some liquid into this, and if I fill it over and paint it flat, it's just going to be a weird little pool inside that. Who knows what goes off there? Some kind of weird stuff. And then again, just most of the city terrain, it was all a flat board, and I'm used to creating height, so I wanted to do something more with this. So all the time I'm thinking, what's the objective with the city board? And for me, it was about turning the city board into a 3D terrain table. As I said, it's not a big thing in the game at the moment, but I think thematically they look amazing. So the idea of this Garden of Martyrs, I think I called it. So this memorial garden that I built, really, I don't know why that's thrown in the middle of it, but you can see what I was trying to do, and you can see the size of that thing. It's a huge dominating piece. You can imagine doing a whole bunch of narrative campaigns around that one piece. And the good news is this all breaks apart. Believe it or not, that's actually two pieces, and then this comes off as a terrain piece that can be stored as well. So again, just thinking about that storage and what's going to work both thematically, but what's going to work practically. The trees were magnetized as well, I should mention, so they can come off. Crikey, as you can see, that's actually two boards. And back to the points being made earlier about making modular terrain, that splits down to the middle, so it can be a garden like that, or I can actually place it at opposite ends of the table, and it's just something that you could raise a couple of little buildings on or some ruins on, and it just becomes a standard terrain piece on the other side. Crikey, yes, there's a lot going off over there. Back to that whole... you know what, this is almost like the conversion stuff that Sam's talking about, where you're looking at the model and you're saying, what can I make out of this? And that road section was naturally cracked up, so it just seemed to lend itself perfectly to chew it away with a pair of pliers and to start sticking on extra bits of gravel and stuff like that, like the whole thing is being hit by a shell or something like that. I mean, just to give you an idea, all the way through I'm working on making this table. Is it going to work? Is it modular enough? Does it make sense? I really like the idea of that canal. I think that's probably the shot that represents best what I was trying to achieve. This canal, this central theme was this canal. Remember, all of this work starts from one idea of saying, wouldn't it be cool to have this huge wide canal running through the city, but still being practical from a gaming point of view. The tanks still fit over the bridges, the troops can still run along the footbridge, and that's raised for the heavier vehicles and those kind of things, I think we even had a game on it. We had a game on it just to test whether the terrain was working, and this is a good example of sort of saying, to me, if you've got models behind that, they're not in view. You know, if you can see through those windows, no, they don't count anymore. Unless you're actually stood in the window, you can be shot at and you can shoot out of. That's kind of the house rule. We've played on those for a few times. As you can see, I pushed on with this and made an 8x4, believe it or not. So that's not because I want to use them all in 8x4, but I'm just thinking, what can we do with this? And as you can see, I had some spares left over. I had this landing pad, so strangely enough, that's actually not a Citadel board. What it's using is a lot of the offcuts. And as I pushed on with that, as you can see, I'm laying the offcuts down onto 5mm 5mm ply and creating a landing pad that's actually on the ground, which was some kind of like ceremonial landing pad. So I built this little square here where someone stands, and some kind of control panel there to raise and lower it, and those kind of things. And then I worked on to how could I incorporate this with other gaming boards. I'd already produced a desert board at this stage, and I was thinking, you know what, if I can do the edge of the city, then I can use some of the squares from my desert board and some of the squares from my city board. And yeah, I mean, maybe that's another good theme to discuss briefly, really, is the idea of creating multi-purpose terrain. So I think this is a good example. This one piece here, this one 2x2 piece here, extends my city terrain. It gives me an outer limit for the city terrain, so we can already thematically start to design a battle at the gate, you know, where the enemy forces are flooding through the gateway and those kind of things, and I'm thinking how that's going to play. And at the same time, as you can see, what I'm building up here is a desert texture, and lo and behold, I have a desert board. So all I'm thinking is all I need to do is to create a couple more boards where this road continues out into the desert, and that's great. I've now got a desert board. I've got a desert board leading to a city out of limit. I've got a city out of limit leading into a city battle, and then you take all of those off and I've got a city battle. So in the space of those few boards that I've made, I've got 4 distinct gaming arenas that I can play on, and that's before you start mixing the modular elements up. So these idea of sort of these transition pieces that enable to use previous projects and those kind of things. And I think a good example of that is the Zone Mortalis. I've built an entrance to the mine. I mean, it's a brilliant, it's a brilliant idea if I say so myself, because you fight your way through the city, you can come to an industrial zone, and inside that industrial zone is an entrance to a mine, and then you can, fight inside the zone. So just those little link pieces that don't take much to do. Crikey, as you can see, I did get a little bit carried away now. I have to confess, this is me losing it a little bit, because Jack had bought a bunch of this terrain for use in his Space Wolf army. He decided Space Wolves don't use terrain, and just said, Dad, if you can do something with that, that's cool. So as you can see, I was really just building this outer defense wall. Got a couple of those craters. I've got one of the old craters left. We'll talk about this. I mean, yeah, it's a good place to maybe just have a quick look at this. I know I'm running close on time, folks, but if you don't mind bearing with me, we'll run on a little bit. This is less planned, more inspiration now. Getting stuff out of the bit box. So what have I got left? I've got these 2 outer pieces left. It's not quite enough to do that, but if I put those in the middle of that, and I stick that on the end there, and that little piece on the end there, I can bridge this gap. So imagine if it was the Wall of Martyrs and it's been shelled in a couple of places. Cool. I think I can make that work. So you start messing around with it a bit more, and you say, well, does this work? It doesn't work as well, does it? Oh, we'll come back to the sandy bit. And as you can see, this is where I ended it, was actually it is going to work. And it works so much, I'm happy enough to hack some of these road sections away, which I've got left over from the previous terrain pieces where I've been cutting these up to make paces. And yes, that does take some guts to be able to be happy to do that. And I've got this really, really old moon crater sat in a box somewhere. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, because these craters are made up of the outer wall. Let me see if I can jump into this stuff. So, you can see, I'm thinking, how can I use every spare piece I've made? Here's all the offcuts I've done from terrain pieces. So, how's that going to make a road section? Here you go. So there's a good example. These were perfect for the inner city pieces, because they've got these little pieces leaning against them and the little drum barrels, and that to me was the edge of the desert. And just by combining it together, it could create something that works really well, really quite thematic. You know, I did talk about some of the homemade terrain, and maybe I want to spend a little bit of time doing this, because this wasn't, as you can guess, this wasn't a cheap project. You know, this was all done with one city board, and it was just by hacking that city board up and being prepared to hack it up, I could make more out of it. It's worth mentioning that, you know, because obviously that's, you know, 2/3 of a board, which obviously left this other section here to make more boards out of. So that's where the planning went into this. I actually took photos of each one of the boards and printed them out on A4, and then I printed them out 4 or 5 times, and then I started snipping them up with scissors. So before I got utterly brutal with this, I was snipping away thinking, how many spare pieces do I get out of this? Can I use those spare pieces and combine them together to make another terrain piece? And that's really what I was pushing on. Crikey, you can see the work here. I'm just daubing grey paint on top. And this was almost to just, if nothing else, just to give me an idea of how well it was working and where I needed to add more detail. And I didn't mind the fact that this was just cluggy grey paint, because, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to be a blasted apart, you know, terrain piece, basically. Right, okay. Yeah, we'll stop there for now. I want to show you one last bit, which was back to that whole idea of the kind of do-it-yourself terrain rather than the stuff that was modified. And then we'll probably call it a night and hope that somewhere along the line it's inspired some of you and you might want to go out and do stuff. Who knows? Right, here's a good place to start. In fact, let's just quickly catch up. DJ the Lucky One says, Phil, city terrain is looking awesome. What sort of timescale are you talking about between stages and pictures you've taken? Most of that terrain was done in the space of about 10 days. I worked on it almost every night, and I work fast, I have to say. At those stages I'm working pretty fast, so I'm hacking away, I'm gluing it together, I'm not worrying too much. Hot glue gun is your friend. The great thing about hot glue gun is it sets really quick, so there's no waiting around for glues to set. So I was just sticking it together, you know, sleeping on it, getting up the next day, coming home from work and thinking, right, push on now. I'm putting a good 2, 3, 4 hours into it. And I think if you don't look too close, and remember that it's a gaming table, it's not a scenario piece, you know, you can move on quite quick. Red Cuffs, Coleman, I like the idea of challenging terrain, but it to be every time the board is played on. Okay, I think that's a conversation between Red Cuffs and Coleman. Reaper says, how to make craters, ? How to make craters. Well, we'll talk about that in this one. Maybe that's a good place. So I'm coming there, at least how to make that stuff. You should do a video too on this if you haven't already. Marlboro69, no, I haven't, mate. I haven't done videos on this because a lot of the time some of this stuff was done early in the channel, and we were kind of doing everything simultaneously, so I wasn't concentrating too much on creating videos, although I have shot footage for some of that stuff and it's just remained in the can, as they say, for a long time. But yes, one day they'll be dragged apart. I think it makes more sense for me to kind of release a series of videos when I know they're going to be used on the channel. The last desert piece we did, I did a bunch of rough cut videos on that, so if you want to check that out, I talk through how I went through all of that, and I'll show you the desert stuff next. Did I do Lehman Rush Bridge in tanks? I miss difficult, dangerous terrain so much. I'm with you there, mate. James is in there as well, saying hello, and that's WBG, which is West Berks Gaming, isn't it? Is that right? Sorry, James, if I've messed that up, but I was looking at your Facebook page only earlier on, actually. I was looking at the work you're doing. You're messing around with some of those Green Stuff World paints, aren't you? Right, okay then. What else we got going off? Oh, right, okay. The table is going to be epic, Phil. Thank you very much, James. There's a 3-colour rule, you know. Don't get me started on that. I've really got to get that terrain piece done. Whoa, that's not what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. Okay, desert board. Again, back to that inspiration stage. I'm looking around, I'm finding imagery that I think makes sense to me. I like this layered stuff. You know, I really like the kind of looking at this sort of segmentation and these horizontal bits, thinking how can I get on with that. Trusty blue foam, absolutely love that stuff. Trusty plywood, layering that up so it doesn't warp. And as you can see, what I'm doing is just working away, loads of wood glue, loads of clamps, keeping everything nice and flat, building up the hills, And right now, I've got an idea. There's a sketch. You know how many hills I'm making, where the cross section's going to be, how they're going to join up. Remember me saying that I've made some terrain that's compatible with the Citadel gaming boards? Well, that's basically what makes them compatible, is this profile. All of their hills have this sort of introductory slope, followed by an edge piece, followed by the top level piece. And all I did was trace around that and cut some stuff out of plywood with it. And these are weights, by the way. These bottles here are weights. So, yeah, don't read too much into that. I wasn't drinking on the job. This was funny. I thought you'd quite like these. Mike came round to help out on this one. So I was teaching Mike the ways of the Dremel. So there's a bit of Magic Mike. And there he was, creating cracks and stuff in the edge of the wood for me. Sam was helping as well. As you can see, he's pretty busy. And this was actually a piece I was working on, and then Sam desperately needed a terrain piece for an army showcase, so we repurposed it before it was even finished. So I took it back at the end of that and said, right, it's now going to be part of the desert board. And then Sam did actually help. Look, he was hitting foam with a hammer. He's pretty happy there. He's going to kill me for putting those in, but I can't help it. He was really pleased with himself, and we'll see some of this terrain later. Mike carried on with the Dremels, hacking away into the wood, and Sam got on with some more terrain pieces there. And to be honest, the brief was break up loads of blue foam, use wood glue, stick them together, and it will make terrain. And then he made that. With this, there's numerous ways you could do this. I was actually using a hot wire cutter, a shaped hot wire cutter. You can actually make those things yourself, by the way, if you Google it up. There's loads of ways you can make your own hot wire cutter. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's possible. You could also do that just by knife. You could hack into it and stuff. You create your own effects just by trimming with a nice sharp scalpel and hacking into it. But the reason I like the hot foam cutter is it's less messy. It's as simple as that. And all I did was move the wire cutter down in a little ziggy-zaggy in-out motion to create those layers. So you could see where Sam's little sections were coming together. Look, the stuff he was hammering together essentially formed the basis for this. And we were pushing on with the table, thinking about hills and valleys and those kind of things. And as you can see, just working through it, thinking, how can I get on with this? Oh, look, I even rope Jack into getting some base colours down there as well. And this is always a good point. Get some base coat down on it and sort of see how it's working. I mean, this is pre-texturing. They were all textured up as well. You get the idea. I think this is an interesting point. And I'm hoping that somewhere in here, if I can find the photo, I wanted a cracked earth texture. And while I was out walking the dog, I spotted this on one of the local farm roads, and I thought that's exactly what I'm looking for. I want this like there was once water. It's long since dried up and cracked. I love that little dark area in the centre, and I think if I go back down to what I actually produced, if I can get to it, because I've gone way past it. So that's the start of it. And you were asking about the Martian terrain. Somebody was asking about the Martian terrain. That was done by putting a layer of wet PVA glue onto the foam, onto the base coat, and before the PVA had set, putting a layer of plaster on top that was pretty thick. I smoothed it with a palette knife, and then I left it to dry for about 10 minutes, enough for the plaster, for the water to evaporate out the plaster. And what's happened in that process is the PVA underneath is still wet. So all I did was push my fingers onto the plaster and break it apart, and it slides on the PVA. And now this is the next bit. As soon as you break that apart and leave it overnight, the PVA then dries. So all of those broken bits of plaster just glue down to the board. So if you want to make Martian terrain, that's the way to do big cracked earth. I mean, if you want to get into the crackle paints for a 2-foot square board, fill your boots. There are some light crackle paints you can buy that are good for coating larger areas, but if you want deep cracks and those kind of things, that was a great technique. And I think if you go on to show, I used it in several areas. I was filling out these areas here, look, as you can see. So I was again pushing it around and getting the cracks to develop. And then I think somewhere in all of this, there was one last bit I wanted to show. I'm really loving my crack terrain. You can see I was messing around with it. There we go. So the colour was wrong. And I put a wash on it, and it still wasn't quite right. So you know what I did? I went out to B&Q and I got my bases colour matched. No, I didn't take a Tyranid along. I took a spare paste along, and that is emulsion paint, colour matched to my Tyranids with the wash on top. And so I just started to layer that down. And if you remember that sort of dark area there, somewhere in here, there you are. That's what I was. It's not perfect. It's not exactly the same, and it certainly hasn't photographed perfectly. But the idea of this sort of dark area in the centre here, and then the cracks to the outside. So that's what that was it really. And again, you know, in terms of materials, that's a pretty extensive table, with quite a lot of modular elements to it. The most expensive element of that is the blue foam. You can use polystyrene. It's not as hard wearing. I think overall, the plywood I paid maximum about £30 for. And then the foam board for that table I paid about £40 for. So the blue foam insulation. So you're looking at about £70 for a 6x4 table built to how you like it. You know, forget, okay, so PVA glue and stuff like that, but and the paint's on top. But overall, I thought that was that's pretty good going. It's actually an 8x4 table. I'm not showing two of the sections. Most of the stuff I do 8x4, and the reason I do that is because if I've done hills and those kind of things, I always think making a couple of extra flat sections are no big deal. So I just make a couple of extra flat sections to go with it. There you go. Well, you know, I've been an hour and I've rambled on quite a lot. I hope you kind of enjoyed that. I did have other projects to show, believe it or not, but I've just run out of time, probably because I just rambled on too slow. So apologies for that. I thought it was worth spending an extra few minutes just to show you, you know, one more project. Otherwise, I'd only looked at two, which is pretty dire, isn't it, really, if I'd only spend the time to look at two. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll have a quick look at the chat before I call it a night, and if not, I hope this has kicked off your week in a wonderful manner. That's always what I aim to do with Monday Musings. So let's just have a quick catch up on the chat and see what we got on there. Here we go. Sorry, there is a comment from the Emperor of Denmark which has just jumped off the top of the screen, so please bear with me. Why isn't that working? So apologies. The chat's just gone doolally on me. I'm building a Warhammer diorama for my school. Any suggestions on how to make it? Well, hopefully I've covered some of that. You know, use the polystyrene, build up the layers, hack away with them with a knife. Cover them in plaster is always a good idea, just to give them that harder texture. So either paint it, add it to your emulsion paint to give it an extra toughness. You know, shop around for small, you know, parts that you can use on it. Is it industrial? Is it wilderness? You know, just hit eBay as well for things like aquarium scenery and stuff like that. You know, the little aquarium terrain pieces. If you want to do a jungle board, aquarium's the place to go, I have to say. If not as well, just check out some of the terrain that's out there. You know, you put your efforts into the board and check out some of the cool terrain that's available out there as well. I mean, overall, I hope the show's been useful for that. You know, if you want to message me through the forum, if you want to give me some specifics of what you're looking for, drop me a message inside the forum. If you haven't used the forum before, it's free to use. You do need to register to the website, but you don't need a premium membership. So if you go onto the forum, as you can see, you've got messages there. So inside here, you have messages, and you can just go along and you can, I'm not going to go there because I've got a bunch of private messages for me at the moment because they are a private messaging system. But if you go along to the messages, sign up to a free account on the website, go along to messages, and if you start typing WGO Phil, look, you'll see my lovely happy face hanging around the forum from time to time. If you start typing in WGO Phil, drop me a message, and then if you want to have a chat about what you're trying to achieve, I'm happy to give some advice on that. Right, okay, so like materials, so plywood, MDF if you're using MDF, PVA on each side so it doesn't warp, and I mean just to roller it, get a roller some PVA on one side, flip it over, roll it on the other side, and clamp it. Well, actually you clamp it while each side dries, but we'll talk about that another time. Emperor Denmark, there's been some good tips tonight, so if you missed it, check out the older videos. Yes, there is an old section somewhere in all of this. I think there was, can't remember where they ended up, the rough cut section there, look, in the website. If you check out the rough cut section, I think this desert board, There was a bunch of... There you go, look. There was a whole series on the Desert Board. So we had Desert Board Whip, Desert Board 2, 3, and 4. Which I think, you know, at least has... I think they're like 30-minute videos maximum. Probably more like 10, 15-minute videos. Where I just go through the work I was doing and the stages I was doing. So go check out those sections as well. They're worth checking out. They're only rough cut videos, so they're not full tutorials. It's just me chatting through. And in fact, actually, look, there's some more on the Armageddon scenery. So just talking about the painting in there. Oh, crikey, completely forgot all of that stuff exists. Ah, wow. Right, okay then. Scott says, Sam looks like a 5-year-old in the garage helping Dad. Bless him. It was a long time ago. He was even younger than he is now. No, wait. Yes. That's a great statement. Sam's here for his birthday bash tomorrow, so don't forget to tune in live for that as well. Thanks for another great show, Phil. Your passion for terrain making boards is really shows through. Super inspiring. Well, thank you very much, Daryl. And bye, Phil. Thanks. That's from Reaper putting up with us. See you next Monday. Yes, I think I'm getting it. Let's call it a night. One thing, Sam thanked everybody, all the premium members. We have had a splurge of new premium members come to the channel in the last few weeks, which has been awesome. It's really helping us to grow and develop as well. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of our premium subscribers for supporting us. I don't think we say it enough, but it is awesome. And I also have to say thanks to everybody who comments and stuff on the chats. It's really good to see people come along and join in as well. It really helps our shows if we're engaging with people and it's not just a broadcast service, but more to do with sort of connecting with the community and seeing what you people are looking for. Don't forget, if you want to drop me a message through the forum or something like that, do so anyway. I'll do my best to answer those, or go onto the Facebook group, Wargamer Online Community. Or check out wargameronline.com for lots more. Right, advertising done. Have a good night. We will see you tomorrow for a live battle with Sam and Rachel. So, is it going to be Twitch or YouTube? It's going to be YouTube, I think. I think it's going up. I'm pretty 100% certain it's going up on YouTube. But check out the community website and our Facebook page for notifications on that. But I'm pretty certain it's going to be YouTube. And you will be seeing Sam and Rachel do battle on his birthday with lashings of salt. Alright, see you all. Bye.